This is a primary source thought to be taken in January 1919, depicting Berlin inhabitants cutting up a horse in the street that had been killed in the fighting. This photograph is thought to be taken by a British war journalist or photographer due to the photo coming from British National Archives. This photo could be used to show the living conditions in Germany at the end of the war. It could also be used to show sympathy for the residents of Germany, as these harsh conditions were placed upon them even after the war had finished. This picture was most likely taken during the Spartacist uprising, which led to fierce fighting between government troops and revolutionaries. This source seems to be fairly reliable due to the conditions that were still enforced upon them after the war had finished. Germany had signed an armistice with the Allies in 1918, but the trade blockade was maintained until the new German Republic had signed peace terms in Paris at the end of June 1919. This caused rebellion due to the fact that even though the war was over, they were still starved by the Allied forces and its implementation of the naval blockade. This source is useful in showing the worsening conditions in Germany in regards to the continuation of the naval blockade. As the war went on, and even after the war had finished, the residents of Berlin and the rest of Germany were slowly starved, as they had no access to food outside of their own nation's borders. This caused residents of Berlin to rebel against the government and incredibly desperate measures to be taken to survive. For example, hacking away pieces of meat to eat from a horse in the street that had been killed in the fighting. This is a primary source written in autumn 1916 and published in 1918, regarding the food available to German citizens during the naval blockade. George Abel Schreiner was an American journalist writing for the Associated Press. He went from army to army, camp to camp, talking to as many people affected by the Great War as he could, trying to convey the general feelings and consensus of the war in his writings. Although Schreiner seems to have a semi-neutral attitude towards the German people, he shows empathy for the Germans within his writings. The tone of this source shows the frustration and sympathy that Schreiner may have been feeling at the time. He witnessed the way the German population was living throughout most of the war, including the quality and quantity of food that was provided. Also, Schreiner was a paid journalist, meaning that if his writings didn't sell, he didn't get paid, which may lead to exaggerations in order to sell copies. This source is reliable due to the fact that Schreiner is living in Germany at the time and writing about exactly what he is seeing. The lack and quality of food in Germany during World War I is seen in other sources and already proven. However, the newspaper he is writing for may also have the ability to alter his writings before being published. This source is fairly useful for historians, as it is a first-hand account of what was happening in Germany. It provides an outsider's account of the state of German living and his opinion and feelings on the situation. However, it is also used as a tool to sell copies in an American newspaper. This was information that many Americans had access to, and was one of the only ways they could learn of happenings in the war. This is a primary source made in 1918 by the German government. It is asking the German people to donate their scrap metals to the government because their country needs help. This is due to the implementation of the naval blockade on Germany by the Allied forces, which limited Germany's access to essential scrap metals such as aluminium, copper, brass, nickel, and tin. The German army asking for scraps from its own citizens shows how desperately affected Germany was due to the naval blockade. Not only did Germany have to supply itself during World War I, it also had to send weapons, munitions, and resources to its own allies, for example, Austria and Hungary, who were also equally affected by the naval blockade. On the other side, Britain was being aided by its allies, which was further bolstering their war efforts. This is a primary source straight from the German government. However, it is today found in the British National Archives, which may stretch its credibility, as Britain could use this to show the downfall of the German army and instilling the fact that Britain was winning the war. Other evidence also shows that Germany was more and more affected by the naval blockade as the war went on. which hindered its ability to pile together resources for the production of munitions and weapons. Therefore, it only seems logical that the German army would ask for help from its people in such a time of desperation. By 1918, Germany was extremely depleted and heading towards a downward spiral. They had thrown all their money into the war campaign, had started suffering masses of casualties on the front lines, and the Allied troops had seemed to be bolstered by fresh waves of troops weekly. The German government knew this and realized that drastic action must be taken in order to salvage the war. This was the situation that Germany was in when this piece of propaganda was produced, and because of this, you can tell Germany was desperate. In this source, Germany is depicted as a strong, muscular man. However, at the time, Germany was a depleted nation. This was due to Germany trying to bolster the spirits of its own people by showing that it was still the strong nation of 1914 that had invaded Belgium and started the war. This source shows the attitude of the German army nearing the end of the war, as they still tried to show hope and put up a fight to the end of the war. This is a primary source created by Ruud Schneider in 1915. It depicts three young innocent German girls on a park bench eating war bread and knitting. War bread was a type of Ersatzgut that was used as a replacement or supplement for regular bread during the naval blockade. It used cheaper and more abundant ingredients such as rye over regular wheat, and was thought to be inferior in taste and quality to regular bread. Despite this, however, this source depicts three young, innocent German girls eating their war bread with rosy cheeks. The statement, "War bread makes cheeks red," shows that Germany's spirits wouldn't be affected by the use of Ersatzgoods, and that if these three girls weren't affected, why should anyone else be? This source was produced by Ruud Schneider, a postcard artist for Germany during World War I. The use of propaganda on postcards was extremely effective, as they were something used often by German citizens in 1915. Anytime somebody would send or receive a postcard from a relative or friend, they would read about propaganda regarding the war. This particular source shows that even three young innocent German girls were fine with, if not pleased about the war bread they were eating. The quote, "England wants to starve us," is Germany portraying England as ruthless and savage, which in turn turns the German population against the enemy even more. In propaganda, the opportunity to portray the enemy in a bad light was never missed, as it theoretically took the war to a personal level. This source is reliable in the sense that Germany did use Ersatzgoods as a supplement to regular foods, such as bread, coffee, and even clothing. However, the attitude of the German population towards the use of these products were not as positive as is depicted in this source. The fact that this source was created in the first place proves that the attitudes of the German people towards Ersatzgoods were negative, and the government wished to change that. This source is useful for understanding the desired attitude that the German government wanted the German population to have in regards to the use of Ersatzgoods, however does not show the actual outlook that German people had about these supplement goods. This is a primary source published in 1918, written by American journalist George Abel Schreiner. Schreiner spent most of the war in Germany documenting life in Central Europe during the Great War. He was a journalist writing his book titled The Iron Ration, 3 Years in Warring Central Europe, which was published and printed in 1918 to be read by citizens of the United States. This excerpt portrayed what life was like in Germany during the harsh trade barriers that had been applied by the Allied forces during the naval blockade. Due to Schreiner being of American nationality, his writings were free of the usual German bias, which tried to play down the effects of the naval blockade and the use of Ersatzgoods. However, he was employed to write for an Allied force, which could, however, lead him to exaggerate the details forced on Germany during this time. Schreiner was an American journalist and was therefore being paid to write, and therefore could be slightly exaggerated to sell copies. This source would be useful for learning about how the Germans coped with the naval blockade during the later years of the Great War. It shows how Germans substituted essential resources such as cotton and animal fats out of the process of creating explosives, as they could be used more effectively elsewhere. Although the German population understood that these resources were being used for better purposes, such as clothing and feeding the frontline soldiers, They were still unhappy about the fact that they had to go without their morning coffee.